Welcome to the Woven Energy Podcast with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith. We're here once again to talk about shamanism from the ground up, and this is episode 40. And in this episode, we're going to take a little detour away from our stage 3 that we've been on for a while. So we've been learning some specific techniques, and we're going to do one of our side episodes. So for this episode, we want to talk about prehistoric shamanism, which I think sounds very fascinating, and I'm very excited to hear what Damon's got to say. So first of all, Damon, shall we just talk a little bit about what you mean specifically by prehistoric shamanism? I presume you're talking about hunter-gatherer shamanism?
Yes, I am, mate. Just before we do that, just to note, we got a new patron, Marian Nerpas. Thank you very much. So I've been having a little chat with him on Patreon online. Cool guy.
Excellent.
It's greatly appreciated, mate. Yeah,
fantastic. So welcome to the tribe.
And also another shout out. I do another shout out. This is for Gav Sirasena. Who's a guy I just started doing an internal podcast on Agile with at Cambridge, and we're talking about doing a public one. So be interesting to see what people think of that. Certainly, if
shamanism in business.
Patrons, give me a shout on Patreon if you think that sounds like a reasonable idea. Not necessarily. Yeah, well, it is kind of. But yeah, that's your own idea, and that's been going okay. We've got some good feedback on it. So yeah, so yes, you're right. It's hunter-gatherer shamanism. Anything prehistoric and shamanism related is going to be hunter-gatherer, because really the writing system, prehistory, what does that mean? Well, that means there's no written records, right? So most all original societies didn't use writing. Writing developed along with the miasma. So although you will get shamanistic societies that have writing systems, certainly, for instance, the 13th century, the Mongols were very shamanistic, and they had a writing system. It tends to be the exception rather than the rule. But in general, if we're talking about prehistory, and in this episode, I'm going to talk about things from a long time ago, then we're definitely talking about...
We're talking pre-civilization.
Yeah, we're talking pre-agriculture in some cases. Because, I'd like to go back quite a long way. I guess give a bit of the reasoning behind this. I think that it's quite easy, looking at, not just on this podcast, not just us, but, everybody in the shamanistic or shamanic space. If you go in the bookshop and look at the books on shamanism that are available, or on Amazon that are available, it's very, very easy to get all theoretical about it. It's very, very easy to get all kind of talking about it as a subject, anthropological approach to it, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's very interesting. It's very baseline, though. And it gives a kind of skewed impression. And it all comes, a lot of those approaches to studying the subject of shamanism come out of civilization. They come out of us, first of all, developing agriculture. We use the agricultural surplus or the results of agriculture to build bigger societies. For whatever reason, we seem to think that the bigger societies need sort of hierarchical control from a bunch of, for want of a better word, kings and managers and leaders and all this kind of stuff. We feel that that's necessary, and even if we don't, whoever gets physical control of the agricultural surplus is able to a certain extent, force us to behave in that way anyway. That then, under those circumstances, we get a lot of specialization, right? And one of the things you get is kind of scholars, people who baseline stuff, people who, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it forms part of our culture. But it is our settled, civilized culture. There were no specialists of that type in early prehistory. There were specialists for sure. I mean, the greatest example of a specialist in ancient or pre-ancient tribal societies, prehistoric tribal societies, was the shaman. The shaman was a specialist in spiritual technique within those societies. So it's not like that all specialisms arose after agriculture came along. It's just like there were much less numbers of specialisms. You might have got specialist hunters, you might have got specialist gatherers, you might have got specialist shamans, but there probably wasn't much else. And so how far back are we talking? I think on a previous episode, I don't know which one, probably quite a long time ago, we did talk about this idea of what is human going back in time. We talked about Australopithecus and the Neanderthals.
Episode 13, I think.
Yeah, we talked about them in terms of being human, and as as a person who's been deeply steeped in shamanism forever, I extend the concept of human naturally. I extend it quite far and wide. Chimpanzees are very, very human. Bonobos are very, very human, and they are our relatives. And the fact that they are
it goes back to seeing everything as a spectrum, doesn't it? Rather than
exactly putting things in little boxes.
Yeah.
And so the reason I want to do this is that is to kind of bring a little reality into this subject. Is that it's not, there seems to be a kind of trend towards it's only here and now. It's only, which is something okay about that. It's only here and now, and we approach this in the way that we approach it. That's more like esotericism, right? That's what the Heretics podcast is about. How do you deal with shamanism in a civilized, settled society? How can we still gain value from shamanistic technique? Really, that's a subject for heretics. It's not a subject for Woven Energy. Here we're talking about shamanism, pure shamanism. Pure shamanism didn't have to deal with agriculture for the vast majority of its history because agriculture hadn't been invented yet. It didn't have to deal with, civilization. It didn't have to deal with kings and all this kind of stuff because none of those things have been invented yet. So, archaeologists divide olden times of human beings into various ages. The famous was the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and the Neolithic. Given 3 ages like that, chopping up into the Paleolithic's basically kind of the first stone tools, achieved through flint knapping. It's also easy to think that it was all about stone tools. It wasn't just all about stone tools. Obviously, those people were very, very good with wood as well. It's just that the stone artifacts tend to survive better. They get preserved better than the wooden ones, but they were obviously very clever people. The Mesolithic and the Neolithic are a relatively short period of time leading up to and including parts of this kind of agricultural revolution.
And just to be sure, we're talking agricultural revolution. We're talking 10,000 BC, the typical figure.
Starting from, remember, this all came along in different parts of the world at different times. If you go to the Kalahari Desert, you're talking about 1980s, 1990s, right? So, it depends, and some of those guys are still very, the San people and the Kogan people, I can't pronounce that at all, but I like to have a go at it. These very shamanistic peoples, they're still there, and they're still not too sure about all this stuff, that we do. Bless them. And a good job it is too. They preserve this wonderful culture for us into the modern world. So.
Well, there's one that springs to mind. I can't remember what they're called, but if you go anywhere near them, they shoot you full of arrows. There was a Christian missionary that went there recently, didn't they? And they shot him.
Yeah, that tends to be that kind of thing tends to be island societies because.
But it's preservation, isn't it? Because they bring diseases.
Absolutely.
They bring diseases and wipe them
absolutely.
out.
They have no immunity at all, and we the Western civilization have wiped out no end of people through bringing diseases, and so what I want to do is just rather than talking about the old story about what's the role of a shaman. I think we've covered that in a hunter-gatherer society, in a prehistoric society. Rather say, we have these hunter-gatherer societies today. We have pure shamans today. We have these sort of pastoral societies that are transitional, like the Mongols, and they have shamans and shams in Siberia and South America, North America, and all over the world. There are shamans. How do we know that the shamans of ancient prehistory, to me, when I talk about human, I'm normally talking about the last 2 million years rather than the last 10,000 years. How do we know that those guys had anything at all in common with the shamans we have today? We'll probably all, by episode 40, it's wonderful that we've got to episode 40 on Woven Energy. By episode 40, we're probably all reasonably familiar with what we think shamans do and the kind of things. So how long have they done this? How long have they done this kind of thing? So here's the question.
Do you want to just quickly give a very quick recap as to what that our view on that is and what that is?
There's quite a few bits to it, but I'm just talking about when we're talking about prehistory. Like, there's no records, other than some ancient oral tradition that gets handed down in terms of legends, like you got in ancient Greece and that type of stuff. But I'm just talking about the physical paraphernalia, So shamans go into what ordinary people, uneducated people, will review as a trance. They use various techniques. They use dance. They use animal spirits. They use various different types of dress and headgear. They use music and musical rhythms to help achieve a shamanistic state. And they use famously psychoactive substances and all this kind of stuff. And also they have a strong sense, including in the esoteric tradition, of renewal and rebirth, and they follow the seasons and the changes in the seasons and the ongoing eternal cycle in nature, and they're obsessed with change, and they have this idea of the three worlds or the three realms, and also this kind of duality, and this kind of idea of a yin and yang between kind of male and female, representing the creative aspects of the world. And so those would be superficial characteristics of shamanism the world over, if you like. And so the question is, if people in the far distant past were doing something different, we should see something very different in the archaeology. And I just wanted to do a quick review to show that we don't at all. We see the same thing again and again. So what we've said a few times, I think you've said it, when you look all over the world, you see shamanism everywhere. It's not like one of these organized exoteric religions where you see big patches. I think we called it like bacteria on a petri dish. It's almost like a pepper pot. There's not much shamanism anywhere, but it's been sprinkled all over the globe, and it's all over the place. So that's in spatial distribution around the world. But how about through time? My suggestion is, as you go back through time, no matter, and a very far back through time, for what we have archaeology for instance, you'll still see the same things. Shamanism's not a lot different from each other at different places around the world. It's also not a lot different from each other all through long swathes of time. Now, the Neanderthal people, what we call the Neanderthal people, are a great example of that. I think we mentioned them before. They were discovered actually, I think the first bones were discovered in Gibraltar, as I recall, in the middle of the 19th century. But nothing much came of that, because although Darwin was knocking around, he hadn't really done his stuff yet. And so nobody really knew what to make of him. But actually, it was actually...
He hadn't committed his heresies.
But in the 1850s, 1860s, which is very much the time that Darwin was causing mayhem, in the Neander Valley, in German, I believe Tal is a valley, so this is Neander Valley's Neanderthal, right, which is near Dusseldorf. They found some ore bones of the same people. I call them people, and we, over time, more and more evidence of the Neanderthals has been found. In modern times, we've been able to do DNA analysis on some of the material from the Neanderthals, and we've done carbon dating, and all the kind of the full panoply of different disciplines that go under this sort of heading of archaeology. They have been applied to it now, so we know quite a lot about these people. And one of the really interesting things is, what the old Victorian attitudes were like, and we said we're going to do. We're going
set in their ways is understatement.
Absolutely. So, So there's also a stereotype. A guy called Boole came up with a stereotype of the Neanderthals. It's just like the dinosaurs, isn't it? You know, they used to believe that the dinosaurs couldn't support their own weight, so they had to stand in the water all the time, and they were dead slow.
Speaking of the role of language in society, I remember when I grew up, until I got a bit more educated on the subject, you know, the word Neanderthal had negative connotations. You would use it as a bit of a derogatory term.
Exactly.
Come on, you Neanderthal, that kind of thing. But really, they're anything but.
Exactly. That's just part of our culture, right? That's how we view. We're excellent, and everybody else is a dummy.
It's a fantastic view on how language can manipulate the way we.
And it's lasted a long time. Even if you go in museums, you know, where serious archaeologists and museum curators have hung out, you can still see those sort of fleshed out depictions of Neanderthals. And the one thing they've all look slightly different from each other. One thing I've got in common is this really dumb expression on their face. You know?
They do, don't they? Yeah.
And what's
slack-jawed.
And what's very interesting is that doesn't really stand up. You know, in our, and they did have what you might call we use terms like highbrow and lowbrow, don't we?
Yeah.
You know, I guess a lot of stuff that goes on in Cambridge is supposed to be highbrow, you know. I have seen different evidence from that. By the by. That's bad. And worse still in Oxford. Never mind. The issue with that is they did have quite low brows, but actually just the head was a different shape. The brain capacity of Neanderthals was virtually identical to modern humans. They just had a sort of different brain, different distribution.
Aren't we all 4% Neanderthal or something?
Well, we'll come on to that. So, we're more than any 4% Neanderthal. We're more than 4% chimpanzee, man. You know, the whole point is it's the individual markers that the geneticists are used to identify what is human. But the vast majority of DNA is in common with all sorts of, I'd say we're more than 4% insect, I would guess. You know, it's because it's only small segments of the DNA that they look at, you know, and they might be talking about a percentage of that small group of segments. But if you look at the entirety of the DNA, we're probably more than 4% insect, I would guess. So the issue is, they're very close to us. The DNA, the latest DNA studies suggest that we're not actually, you know, as a species, we're going to call us a species, Homo sapiens. We're not direct descendants of actual Neanderthals, or we may be descendants of a few of them, but not en masse. We came from a different group of people who came out of Africa at a later date, that given our best evidence or knowledge at the moment. But that doesn't mean we're not close to these people. These people are our ultra close cousins. And they're definitely people, right? And the issue
we're definitly interbred, right? That's been proven.
Well, but the question is to what extent, and not a very great extent is the latest. But it hardly matters. The bottom line is we have a common ancestor, right? And that common ancestor was a human. So what does it matter? That's kind of a shaman's point of view. And so just in terms of the shape of the skull, they have this thing called an occipital bun. So they have less on the front at the top. That would be like our cerebral cortex. That's the bit that allows you to obsess over the baseline, right? They had less of that. Surprise, surprise. These guys survived the Ice Age, right? We didn't. But they have a lot more on the back. And nobody knows exactly. It's called the occipital bun. Nobody knows exactly what that was for, but you can give a bit of a guess, because in the human brain, over at the back, you have things like coordination, you have things like vision, those sort of things, those very immediate things that enable you to deal with the environment. And I was listening to a lecture by an archaeologist actually, who was saying that you pull the average Neanderthal out of that population, you put an Olympic jersey on them and you'd stick them into any of those like running events, especially the endurance ones. They will crucify everybody at the Olympic Games. They were very, very strong, very, very fast, very, very agile, and a larger part of the brain that deals with coordination. And also, remember, these people are pure hunters, so a larger part of the brain that deals with vision as well would make some kind of sense, especially if they're hunting at night, yeah? So these guys, but this idea came up originally from this guy called Boole. Actually, he worked from a Neanderthal skeleton, actually had arthritis, and he used this as what all Neanderthals were like. Since that has been completely disproven, but he thought they walked on the sides of their feet like a lot of monkeys do. When they get on the ground, or a lot of tree climbing animals in general, when they get on the ground, they walk on the side of their feet. Actually, the Neanderthals didn't. They walked on the soles of their feet, just like we do. Just this particular one he picked as I guess he just picked out the one that was the most degenerate looking, had chronic arthritis, and so that's what our whole image of the Neanderthals is based on. But there was based on the builders brutish. They're brutish. That was kind of our view of them. But actually, in terms of who wiped out who, you know what I mean? Who's the brutish ones? And also, there's very strong evidence that they were extremely caring, and they had a spiritual life. They had a strong spiritual life, perhaps stronger than us. So there are first of all, Neanderthals buried their dead.
Yeah, like graves and rituals.
So nobody, if it was what was that cat video that said cat videos remind us that animals are cute, but out there it's a dog-eat-dog story of death, disease, and destruction or something like that kind of thing. They definitely weren't like that. There's a bunch of evidence for that. One is that they buried their dead. But another one, they buried their dead in a fetal position, which shows that they had some kind of understanding of, first of all, they knew what a fetal position was, right? Fetal position, that shows an understanding of human anatomy, how the fetus is positioned inside the womb. They're buried with grave goods, axes, and stuff like that. There are examples of adults who were injured, badly injured, or who had abnormalities, who wouldn't be able to look after themselves, who survived into adulthood in their 40s at least.
And so a massive community, a sense of community.
They got each other's backs, just like good agile teams should have. Draw a parallel there, and they definitely got each other's backs, and they were also sort of religious artifacts to make like a ring of goat's horns, the society in general. So these are not accidental. We found a lot of Neanderthal graves. So this is a general practice. These fetal burials, and it harks back to sort of the sort of ritual birth and rebirth that you still get not only in shamanism, you get it in esotericism now. You think about what is a Masonic lodge? The ritual death and rebirth of shamanic master. That's a long way removed in time, but it's effectively the same thing. And also, these groves are divine spaces. Obviously, the original groves are made out of trees, most of them, so we don't know, we wouldn't see them, we wouldn't see any evidence of them. Those trees are long gone. But they also use caves, right? They use caves for their living spaces, but also for their divine sacred practice. And a lot of these things are found in, caves. But the most amazing thing, well, a couple of amazing things. One is when they buried these bones, the bones of their dead, they would sometimes mark them with red ochre, a red colour. And red colour is, in both shamanism and esotericism, red colour is kind of always been a symbol of energy change. So, for instance, in Chinese esotericism, you have the vermilion bird of the south, vermilion being red. In Rosicrucianism, you have the rose cross or the rosy cross. It's like a red cross. And in a lot of forms of shamanism, red's an important colour. It's an important colour in Mongolian shamanism, for instance, in Siberian shamanism, along with the traditional blue in Mongolia. This is a very, very important colour in shamanism today, and it was used then.
Do you have any theories as to why?
Clearly it's just fire tends to be red, and it's they're trying to symbolize energy change. Red makes perfect sense, but not just that. The most amazing thing that I know of with the real Neanderthals is sometimes, they buried their dead with bouquets of flowers. Now we still do that, and of course the flower. Coming back to Rosicrucianism and the Rose Cross, if anybody wants to know what that's about, we're doing it right now on the Heretics podcast. Jump over there. The flower represents renewal, the same idea of renewal within nature, just like the ring or circle of the horns that also represents renewal. And we know these things were bouquets because we find huge amounts of pollen in these graves. And actually, the pine branches around which the flowers were wound are still there in some cases. And these are literally some really good examples of this have been found in Kurdistan. These things are literally religious or spiritual artifacts that have been part of the religious life of people who aren't even us. They're just our close cousins. And they are using the symbols that Rosicrucians today are using. This rosy colour and the rose cross. The rose is the symbol of, in many ways, the symbol of knowledge, it's a symbol of energy change. So this is a very different picture, I guess, from the one that even, I remember as a kid thinking, big Stone Age Neanderthal hits other Neanderthal on the head with a club kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
That was that was the thing, wasn't it? And the evidence would show just the opposite. The evidence would show they were greatly caring people. They were very able, they were very clever, they were great hunters. And they were able to survive the Ice Age.
I mean, the thought that they have mastered fire is evidence that...
Yeah, absolutely. You can't make red ochre without fire, right? So, so that's the Neanderthals. But, coming, closer to home. So incidentally, when we're talking about Neanderthals, we're talking about 100,000 years ago down to about 35,000 years ago. That's basically what the last ice age, if you like. So we're talking a long way back. And, the further you go back, the harder it is for things to be preserved. And although we call them cavemen and we imagine them napping flint and making stone tools, actually, my suspicion is they were absolute masters of wood, not stone was like a side thing. And there have been, I think, as we talked about in a previous podcast, some very, very sophisticated spears and things found from prehistoric peoples, aerodynamic spears and this type of stuff. So although the stone tools are what survived, mostly they were, like I say, they're excellent with wood and various, hides and this type of stuff from the animal products. But then, so that's the Neanderthals. But what about us ourselves? Well, one prehistoric us, they used to call us, when I was a kid, I remember the culture, do you remember Cro-Magnon man? They used to call us Cro-Magnons. But that's us, right? So if they were, we're talking about, still tens of thousands of years ago, we're still talking about us. It's still Homo sapiens. It's us. They're no different from us at all. So if they're Cro-Magnons, so are we, right? That's a quite point. I might introduce myself as Damon the Cro-Magnon in my next meeting. Hi, I'm Damon. I'm a Cro-Magnon. I'm not sure. That there would be negative connotations to that as well, because they're back in time. But that you couldn't distinguish. You put a Neanderthal, dress him up in a suit and you stick him, say, on the tube in London or something like that. Probably, maybe
you'd get a few funny looks, but it'd be all right.
But no, it'd be just fine. Yeah, and actually, if you picked judiciously from the population, the ones that were most Homo sapiens looking, probably nobody would notice. With these guys, you could pick any one of them and stick them on the tube, and nobody would notice. Yeah, they'd have to be wearing modern clothing. Yeah, but that's it.
So 35,000 years ago, you took a Homo sapien and plonked it right next to one of us. You wouldn't tell the difference.
For sure. That's true. But what I'm saying is, if you took from 50 or 100,000 years ago, you took a Neanderthal and you carefully select them, you also probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. That's the point. This is like this flow and flux that we're talking about with evolution and with species changing over time. Because of the variety in our own population and the variety that there would have been in the Neanderthal population, if you judiciously selected two individuals, pick the person who looks most like a Neanderthal and the Neanderthal who looks most like a Homo sapiens, and you stick them together, they would probably look very, very similar to each other. That's probably the best way to put it. Yeah. So what about us? So that we have a lot of prehistoric evidence for us as well. One of the things that we know is that caves were, again, big to both. Caves were big to Neanderthals, and they're big to human beings, early human beings. Caves are groves, aren't they? They're sacred spaces. When I go out to find a grove to practice in, I'm looking for a sacred space. I find a big cave, which there are some of in Cornwall. Wow, great place to practice, right? You have the resonant quality. You can find good places to stand where the energy feels good, and the acoustics are great. You could practice your Hummy-look technique, for instance, for those who know what that is, or use your drum or whatever you want. And caves are great for this. They also have that sort of darkness. And so you get in cave environments, you get a natural attraction for shamans. And surprise, surprise, we find loads of shamanistic artifacts associated with caves. And we find, including with the Neanderthals, but with, more recently, so let's say there's a famous cave in Lascaux in France from about 20,000 years ago. We're talking where there's unbelievable. Just do a search on Google Images on Lascaux cave art, Lascaux. I don't mean just now, Joe, I'm just talking about in general, people listening. Some of the artwork is absolutely gorgeous. It's unbelievably well executed. And it is unbelievably shamanistic in nature. It's animal spirits, right? It's things that are important to these. All hunters, doesn't matter whether they're Neanderthals or Homo sapiens or whatever they are, it makes no difference. They're all hunters, they're all hunter-gatherers. They're interested in the same things. They need to understand the movement, the turning of the seasons. They need to understand where the animals are migrating. And way back then, just as now, they need shamans. And in one part of this cave in Lascaux, there is a scene of a shaman interacting in a clearly very kind of unusual way with a buffalo.
Unusual in what way?
When you look at it, you find it if you put it in a shaman or something like that. You look at it, it looks like the buffalo's just knocked the shaman onto his back. I don't search for it now, mate. It might take you a little while because there's loads of stuff from Lascaux to find.
Yeah.
What I will do
is
extraordinary.
I'm just looking at it now.
I will pick out this image and a few others to give a sense of what the Lascaux imagery is like. But you would think, a lot of that artwork, I couldn't do that. So we're talking about very, very skilled artists, quite apart from anything else. But what have we got in this scene? We have a shaman who, on a superficial interpretation, it looks like the buffalo's just knocked him down. But what does that all mean? Actually, that's what's going on. This is about shamans taking on animal spirit flavors, taking on the sense of an animal. And if you look really, really close at the shaman, you notice a couple of things. One thing is that's very common in shamanic art. You have exaggerated genitalia. And that's not just from this one. We see that again and again in ancient shamanic art. This is all about the fertility aspect of shamanism. The renewal of the seasons, like the flowers always used to represent things in terms of renewal. The exaggerated genitalia, both for male and female. Obviously, we have those little figurines from the ancient past where you've probably seen them, the Earth Mother figurines. That's somebody, probably in the very next episode of Heretics, that's somebody we're going to be talking about quite a lot, because we're coming on to the part where we meet the Earth Mother in the chemical wedding, about halfway through day one. But
it's going to be a long series, that one, isn't it?
The male and female genitalia often exaggerate in terms of shamans, female shamans and male shamans, because they represented this renewal within nature. And this is no different in this case, but, there's the famous bee-headed shaman from Tassilian Adja in North Africa. It's exactly the same thing. And so what's going on here, that the shaman is taking on the characteristics of a bird here. And also he has a staff.
I can see it. So that's the bird. There's a bird in there. I've got the picture up. There's the bull.
There's the bird's head on the shaman. And there's also a staff with a bird on the top of it, which is probably a rattle or a shaker.
Yeah.
And you have a spear here with an atlatl, which is like a spear throw, which is very common among hunter-gatherer peoples. It just gives you a lot more power with the spear. And it's all about hunting. What was the shaman's primary job? The shaman's primary job was to take on the spirit of animals and find out where the animals are going. So one way to do that is to soar like a bird, to find the animal. And this is so take on the spirit of a bird, like an eagle or something. You can go and find the animal, then you know where to send the hunters to. And so in this scene, the shaman's not actually there in person, but they are close. There's a closeness with the animals that they're hunting. They have.
You described it as a reverence.
A reference, absolutely, a reference, and they're close, and they're there with the animal, and they don't. It's not a domination thing, the hunting. It's a reverential thing. The bird on the top of the staff is probably a shaker for making shamanic kind of music. And we have found things like that, prehistoric things like that we've found quite a lot of prehistoric flutes. Also, somebody found something like a xylophone, believe it or not. And
really?
Then there are animal. Yeah, absolutely, believe it or not. And then there's, animal skins that could be drum. Obviously, drums are made of wood. They're not that good to preserve. And also, most shamans use their drums till they fall to bits anyway. So, the preservation characteristics of these things are not great. But they clearly use musical instruments a lot as part, just like shamans today do, as part of their shamanic technique. They're using spirit animals. But the really, really interesting thing to me is, where are these three realms? Well, you need a really good, well-lit version of this picture to see it. And you need one. So in front of the shaman is a bison. But behind the shaman is a rhinoceros.
Seen it, yep.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is between the rhinoceros and the shaman is the trigram meld. Broken baseline, broken midline, broken top line. There are three double-dotted lines representing yin and yang, and it almost looks it looks exactly like the trigram.
Well, it looks like the middle one carries on. It looks like there's 6 in the middle.
No, there are 3 pairs, just like you get in the trigrams, like a broken line. Each trigram has a yin and a yang, yeah? And so I'm not saying it was deliberately drawn as a trigram. What I'm saying is, here is the threefold symbol. This is the secret symbol, the threefold symbol. Each one has a yin and a yang aspect. So for each of the realms, there's a yin and a yang that makes 6 altogether. So it's like the hexagonal structure of the Canwa die. It's like the 6 lines of the 64 hexagrams in the Book of Changes. And for all intents and purposes, that sure looks like the trigram meld to me. But that's neither here nor there, really. What's interesting is this threefold nature does appear in prehistoric art the world over as well. We get various symbols. We've talked about the triskel before and stuff like this.
The triskel, that's the classic
and all this kind of stuff. But, we're talking about 20,000 years ago, people were using something to represent that. It looks exactly like a Chinese trigram. It doesn't look a bit like it. It looks identical. Quite interesting to me.
So what's the significance of meld?
So I don't know that there is a significance to this picture. Maybe there is. Maybe a meld would be. You also see pictures of, you probably see yourself a lot of shamans who will wear bear skin, yeah, or something like that. It's a union between the animal spirit and the shaman. Remember, we said animal spirits are real animals, that shaman's taking on the flavor of a real animal. One of the ways back in time that people used to do this was to literally put the skin of an animal on. You see this, either the bull's horns on a shaman or a bear skin over a shaman. And they would literally do that in order to give themselves a sense. And the Celts and various others, you might have heard of the berserkers. They used to wear a bear skin. And ber means bear and serk means skin. So they were actually named after this idea. And that the idea was that the bear skin would give them the power and spirit and of a bear in battle, in warfare. And this is the same kind of thing. So if meld does have a significance, if they understood this symbol in the same way that it's understood in the Book of Changes, then it could well be that. But my point is it's some kind of representation of this threefold,
Yeah, it's just the mere fact that it's there, which is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about from 20,000 years ago here, and also in these caves, it's not the only place where you get this yin-yang idea. Yin-yang is not just Chinese, as everybody will probably know now who's been listening to the podcast. It's found all over the world, found in Freemasonry, it's found all over the place. It's in a lot of those paintings, prehistoric paintings, you get animals and they're paired off. You often get, for instance, you get the female of a particular species standing opposite the male of a particular species in the same kind of cave, if you like, in the same area. And so it's this idea of male and female, man and woman, male and female shaman representing the fertility, the together underlie the creation of the universe. And the echoes of energy change that go on continuously throughout the generations. That kind of idea in yin and yang didn't originate in China. This thing is also way prehistoric, and we see there's lots of this stuff in. I mean, we ain't got time to go into it in huge detail because we're not an art channel. But the bottom line is, what I will do in the patrons area, I'll give a lot of different examples, or a few, not a lot, but a few different examples of really good examples of. Here's a lot of shamanistic stuff from the time before we had books, we had scholars, definitely before we had anthropologists. There's a lot of stuff there. And there's also, this to prove this stuff's old, there are paintings from life of extinct species like Megalosaurus, the giant elk and stuff like this. These species are long gone, and there are paintings of them in this cave, which is unbelievable, really.
Are we talking 30,000 years ago, this cave?
30,000 years ago, that sort of time scale. But it's not the only one. There's others around the world. In terms of the musical instruments, we have there've been Neolithic drums found in China. I'm not sure the exact date on them, but they're very old. They're pre-civilization in China. I
wonder how sophisticated the musical. I mean, obviously the drums are very common because it's animals' hide, isn't it?
I mean,
but you can pitch it. I mean, they would probably be able to tune those drums and get.
But it depends what you mean. It depends what you mean in terms of sophistication, because remember, it's what they're using them for a purpose. They're not using them to entertain anybody. They're using them to support their shamanic technique. But the xylophone, that tends to imply that we're using more than one note, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So quite interesting. And they probably didn't call it a xylophone or what they would called it, but anyway, they were thinking about stuff like this for sure. And then another famous example we mentioned before is Tassilian Adja in North Africa. We're now come down to 12,000 years ago, but we're still talking pre-civilization, especially because of its location. I mean, there's in some areas of that area, there is no civilization today, let alone 12,000 years ago. Clearly hunter-gatherer things, and in this one, you get the animal. You get the animal spirits again. You get in terms of the picture of the shaman, you get the exaggerated genitalia. You get there's various shamans there, but some with horns and some with the famous one has a bee's head. But in this one, you also get the psychoactives. You get the mushrooms, and so you have the mushrooms sprouting from the shaman's skin, if you like. And so there's another indicator from the distant past that there ain't anything new in shamanism. Well, in one way, in terms of shamanistic technique, every time a shaman executes a technique, it's something new. It's something that hasn't happened before in exactly that way, in exactly that context. So in a way, although shamanism, in terms of its technique, is ever evolving and ever new, in terms of the basics of how shamanism works and the paraphernalia associated with modern shamans, when we look back in time, when we look at shamans of the dim and distant past, we see those self-same things again and again and again in pretty much all of the archaeology that we have. You're hard pressed. If you find some decently preserved, fully ancient peoples and their artifacts and stuff like that, you will see these things. It doesn't matter where you are. The challenge is really, can you find somewhere where you don't see these things? And the answer to that is only in places where there's very, very limited evidence. If you look at places where there's a lot of evidence, so for instance, talking about transition from that kind of lifestyle into a settled lifestyle, with places like Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, which is very, very, very early doors of civilization, very, very early days of civilization. You see all this stuff. You see the animal spirits. You see the shamans. You see all the kind of stuff. And it's all, it's all not different from what we've got today in terms of what you'll find. And so, like I say, in the patrons area, I'll stick a bunch of different pictures. I'll put a few in, actually I'll put a few in the patrons on Patreon, on the patrons area on Patreon. But what I will do is what I'll commit to doing, I'll do a much more extensive collection in the Grove for those people who are in there now. And I want to do that because what I want is for the Grove to have something that Patreon hasn't got. So that's what I'll commit to do. I will fish out a bunch of images and put a bit of text around them to give sort of more context to this episode, because the Grove Notes, which is there'll be several areas of the Grove. The Grove Notes is now up and running. We have most of all of our founder and power patrons on there, and over time I'm going to get also the $7 patrons into that area as well. And I would like there to be something in there that's substantive for them. And maybe this will be the first of many things to go in there. There'll be other areas to the Grove in future. But the good news is the platform's sorted out. We've had a few people in there for quite a while now. For instance, founder patrons have been in for a reasonable amount of time. The thing stood up; it hasn't fallen over, so I'm quite pleased with that. So let's make this the prehistoric artwork, shamanistic artwork collection with notes. Let's make that the first substantive thing in the Patreon notes on the Grove. Does that sound reasonable?
That sounds cool. That sounds good.
Yeah.
So essentially what you're saying is throughout time, throughout different areas of the world and throughout history, different peoples will have had very similar, if not the same experience, because it's nature. It's fundamental in nature. And so the depictions of cave art and obvious practices are a reflection of the fact that they've experienced the same experiences throughout the world, irrespective of any form of communication between them.
If you take any shamanistic peoples from around the world and you show them this stuff, it's not unfamiliar to them. It's not anything they're probably going to be able to explain its meaning better than the average person living in a city somewhere. Yeah. It won't be anything unusual to them. Because the thing is, although exoteric religions change and they're different from each other, in inverted commas, in my opinion, they're all different on the baseline, but anyway, not in any other line, but they're all different on the baseline. And perhaps that's the point. It's about getting pedantic about some view of the world on the baseline, isn't it? That's kind of one definition of what exoteric religion is. if you take esotericism, if you take shamanism, actually another way, then it's not. It's not. And this stuff's all familiar. Actually, one of the things I was going to say is an experienced Rosicrucian will be able to explain a lot of this cave art to you. Yeah, they've never had any interest in cave art. They've just learned what they've learned from being a Rosicrucian over many years. The first time they see one of these things, they can probably explain a lot of it to you. There's another way to talk about it, or another way to look at it. And that's how we're talking about modern tradition. Rosicrucian tradition still exists in the world today, and so we're talking about tens or hundreds of thousands of years difference in time, and actually the same symbols, the same ideas embedded in all of this ancient artwork. It's quite an amazing thing on one level. To me, even it's amazing. It shouldn't be, because I totally understand why it is, because shamanism comes from nature, and nature back then wasn't a whole lot different from nature now. And also, in terms of the whole history of the universe, that 100,000, 200,000, even 2 million years is great, like little snap of your fingers, But it is still amazing, because I'm still partly a heavily miasmatic soul from a heavily civilized civilization, so quite interesting.
Well, I remember when I was first trying to promote this podcast over on all the groups and the forums and just get our name out there. It was quite interesting, the resistance to, well, it fell into two camps. There was a lot of resistance to any kind of mention that shamanism is the same thing the world over. But then if you went down any kind of route that it was all the same, and I think we used the word core shamanism back then, you'd just get a load of people back at you saying, "Oh, you're in a certain person's camp." Who uses the term core shamanism?
To be honest, I do remember you mentioning it. I'd never heard that term before. I think you brought it up. You asked me what it means, so I said what it meant to me. But I think that's the first time I'd ever heard the term, to be honest.
Yeah, well, it's you. I think you use the term core shamanism a lot. But anyway, my point was,
since you mentioned it the first time, I started using it because it makes some kind of sense. But what if you remember? What did I say? I said, to me, core shamanism, real shamanism.
Absolutely.
It just means, strip away all the nonsense, strip away all the paraphernalia, and all the baseline stuff, and what you're left with. Yeah.
This is just another deeper layer to the fact that this is just the case, because I've known for a while. It depends how far you want to zoom out and just observe all of these different cultures and their traditions. Because if you zoom out far enough, it's all the bloody same.
So also a lot of people who are interested in shamanism, my experience is a lot of people interested in shamanism are interested in quite a superficial way. And when you are heavily under the influence of the miasma and you approach shamanism, you tend to focus on the things that you understand the best. And those things tend to be the stuff like, what are they wearing? What's exactly the specific order and correct way to do the technique? Those are all things you get in the world of work. Because, in the world of work, you get this idea of best practice. Oh, what's the best process for doing this? Not like what works, but just what's the best practice, let's go, we must do best
what's
practice.
What's the instruction manual I can follow?
I'm like, whenever I hear this, I'm like, well, why don't you then? Do they talk like it's established or something when it's not, And, it's like that. People who understand baseline, people who've been brought up in a heavily miasmatic society, will latch onto baseline of whatever esoteric tradition. So, if I say they don't understand shamanism that well, that doesn't mean the person they're learning off doesn't understand shamanism that well. That just means they're latching onto the wrong things that person is either trying to teach them or that they're trying to pick up from that person. Their focus is in the wrong place. It's on the superficial paraphernalia.
Yeah.
And also a lot of these traditions were becoming miasmatic. They're also about establishing your credibility within the group, which is about establishing social standing. So you have to establish social standing before you can be seen as quote unquote enlightened within a particular group. Well, that's a surefire recipe to hold people back in their progress. In terms of shamanism, because if you have to wait X number of years before you're allowed, based on your quote-unquote enlightenment, progress, then you're never going to progress because it's hard enough as it is, without anybody holding you back in artificial ways like that,
You're not going to do it by going up a mountain and sitting in a cave for 20 years.
So I think on that point, this stuff is quite good because here we are, that's not shamanism. There's no such thing called shamanism. Well, it's not just now, right? We've got 200,000 years and you're still seeing the same stuff, quite interesting.
Great. Fantastic.
Call it a day then, mate?
Let's call it a day. So, just to wrap up, then, you mentioned the Grove. Is this open to the public yet, or is it still Patron
no, it's
only,
not.
or what?
And it won't be for a little while, but it is definitely open to patrons. So part of it, that we're calling it the Patron Notes part of the Grove, is definitely open to power patrons and founder patrons. They're all in, or if they're not, have a check of your Patreon messages. And like I say, our fully intend to roll it out to $7 patrons as well. We're just got to get around to that because it's about creating the user accounts, passwords, and all that kind of stuff. And we're gradually ramping it up. But if you're a $7 patron, it'll come. Just hang fire. It'll come.
So there's no way for anybody to get into the Grove yet, or
unless they get in if they become a patron. That's the only way in at the moment. But in future, there will be alternative ways in.
Yeah, because the Grove, the idea of the Grove as well is to provide a complete video-based, complementing the podcast with videos and exercises and going in depth into the exercises and making them a lot clearer,
that's right. So
etc.
Yeah, so it's on Woven Energy Courses, which is a courses platform we built from Woven Energy with the help of the patrons. I mean, basically the patrons are paid for this thing. Thank you very much, guys. We love you, as they say in America. The platform is divided up into different courses. So the one that's there now is the Patron Notes, the Grove Notes for patrons. Yep. But there will be additional courses on there for other subjects that will have to be decided yet sign-up mechanisms,
right.
but probably won't involve Patreon. Yeah.
So we'll boil it down to this then, guys. There's something awesome on the way, and it's coming. So
yeah, but you can go to wovenenergycourses.com and see what's there, but there's nothing much to log into just yet.
Okay, and if you do want to support us on Patreon, it's patreon.com/wovenenergy. So, thanks ever so much for listening, guys. It's been a good one. I think it's been a really good little light-hearted episode, I think, if you want to think of it like that. Rather than, deep dive into techniques, which we've been at for a while. So it's a nice little side episode. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next time. I think we'll see what we want to do next episode then, Damon.
Cool. All the best, mate.
All right, then. Speak soon. Bye.